in the Garden of Eden and in the temple, but the temple has to use like constant rituals to keep it pure and stuff. But the Garden of Eden was like already pure; it was always pure.
Yeah, and how is the tabernacle different from the Garden of Eden? Jackson?
There's sacrifices in the tabernacle.
There's sacrifices in the tabernacle. There's not a sacrifice in Eden until they're getting kicked out. But before that, there's no death. There's no even animal death. Who's in Eden? God. And who else? And who's in the tabernacle? So what happened to the woman? Can the woman go in? Can the woman even go in the outer court? The only time a woman can go in the tabernacle is when she's being dragged in to see if she's an adulteress or not. And they make her eat some of the dust. And if she eats the dust and is an adulteress, then her body goes crazy and she dies. Other than that, a woman can't go in the tabernacle. What do you make of that? I saw this hand, and then tell me your name. Ethan.
The church that enters the tabernacle could be seen as the bride, and therefore the woman.
Right, and clearly at the end of this story, you have women in Eden because you have the church there. The whole story is how you get the woman back to the Garden of Eden, or at least part of the story. I'll never forget, I was teaching Sunday school in my church, and they asked me to do the kids' Sunday school, and knew I liked the tabernacle, so we were doing the tabernacle. And I love my church. They invest money in people, not in buildings. And so our building is like, the floor is crooked, the walls are old, the rooms are always too small for the kids in there. So anyway, I'm in this room, and they had taken all the furniture out just to get more kids in there. And I had a model of the tabernacle there, and I was kind of standing on my knees, and all these kids were around me, and like 30 kids in there or something. Never forget, there was this little girl just standing. I was looking, she's like 7 years old, but I was looking right in her eyes, and we were looking at the tabernacle, and I asked a question. I said, could girls go in the tabernacle? And this little ruffian old boy said, no, girls can't go. And I was looking right at this little girl, and it was like somebody slapped her in the, I mean, you know, she was like, and then the little boy said, girls can't go in, girls, only boy, you know. And I was like that far away, and I could see this little tear in this little girl's eye, you know, and like her lip is starting to quiver, and like she's got this little white dress on with blue, you know. It's like, and I thought to myself, I am so glad that biblical theology gives me the answer to this. Because we had already talked about the tabernacle being like Eden, and so I'm looking at the little girl. I said, no, were there little girls were there girls in Eden? And eventually somebody said, well, yeah, Eve's a girl, and she was in Eden. And so then I said, and are there going to be girls in restored Eden? And, you know, I'm seeing life come back to this little girl's, you know, and like she's kind of looking around. She's not, the tear isn't about to come out anymore. And I could see somebody said, yeah. And so I said, so the whole story is how you get the girl back to the Garden of Eden. It seemed to me like the seeds of I hate God feminism just went out of that girl's body. The spot came back, and she saw the beauty of the meta-narrative. And I thought that's why we study biblical theology, because it gives answers to questions like that. Yes, girls are excluded, absolutely. But girls were in the original, girls are in the end. The temporary exclusion is pointing to the meta-narrative, because Jesus is winning his bride back and taking her back to restored Eden. And I think that helps us with understanding what the tabernacle is about. Well, let's look at some kind of interesting things. David, were you going to make a comment before we go on?
I was just going to say that it seems like there's a lot of like God trying to be close to us, but Him not wanting to destroy us.
Right, the whole bells thing. Why do they make? And that's the other thing. In Eden, they were naked, but in the tabernacle, it's like you better make sure nobody's naked. Even did you read the thing where you even have to wear special pants so that when you walk up, that there's no possibility of nakedness? It's like, okay, it's Eden, but it's like strange Eden, because there are some things, there are no women there, and like make sure that you have bells, because the wrath of God come. Have you ever thought about this, that in the whole Bible, that 2 chapters, or maybe you could say 2.5 chapters, deal with the creation of the world? So you read through the whole Bible, 1,189 chapters, basically chapter 1 in Genesis and then part of some other chapters. You put all that together, it's basically 2 chapters about the creation of the world. Of the 1,189 chapters in the Bible, nearly 60 of those deal with the tabernacle or the temple or the rituals. That tells me that God thinks this thing is somehow massively important, and so we should look at it. This is a picture from the ESV Study Bible. It's a very good drawing. You can see the Eden-like stuff there with the cherubs. There's gold there, and remember when we read the description of the rivers of Eden, what's true of one of the rivers? It has gold. There's bdellium there. We're told that inside the Ark of the Covenant that manna looks like bdellium. And then the high priest has an onyx stone. We're told one of the rivers in Eden has onyx stone. So gold, bdellium, onyx, cherubs, the immediate presence of God. Special fruit trees, perhaps that's the pomegranate part. The menorah is like an almond blossoms. So this whole thing is made somehow to look like or be reminiscent of the Garden of Eden. Now, I love this picture, the Holy of Holies. It shows a couple of things. One, does it strike you how small the Holy of Holies is? So the Holy of Holies, God tells Moses, make it just like the one you saw in heaven. So I'm going to show you one in heaven, make it just like that. And so he makes this thing 15 feet by 15 feet by 15 feet. It's the only cube I know of in the Old Testament. And at the center of that cube is this little, what looks like a child's coffin. On top of that child's coffin are the cherubs. And then once a year on the 10th day of the first month in the fall, you took blood, and that was the Day of Atonement. The 10th day in the spring is when you offer the Passover. So these are mimicking each other. And notice there are cherubs everywhere. Cherubs on the veil, cherubs through the rails. And can you see how this is reminiscent of God kicking Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden? God killed the animal. There's blood all over the ground. There are cherubs there. They've been told if a sinner tries to get to the tree of life, kill him. And this is reminiscent of that to me. If you take the time to do a drawing, you realize that there's all kind of symmetry in there that you don't notice it when you're when you're reading it, but the Holy of Holies is exactly in the middle of the second half. You have two parallel sections. You have an altar, a laver, a veil, altar, a veil, an inner veil. So there's some kind of mimicking going on, and somehow this is mirroring what's true in heaven. This shows us just how small the Ark of the Covenant is. It's just a tiny thing. What's interesting, that over time, the original tabernacle is small. So 15 feet by 15 feet by 15 is probably where Christopher is there. If you can think of that cube, that's probably the Holy of Holies. Twice that is what the holy place is, so maybe to that. That is the whole tabernacle building. But then when Solomon builds it, he doubles those measurements. So it becomes 30. When Ezekiel has it, it's this huge temple. And you think this is an American football field. This is the measurement of Ezekiel's temple. And he's seeing, so it's like, is the temple growing somehow in heaven? And John, when he measures the cube of New Jerusalem, it's 1,389 miles cubed. Okay, that's my house in Saudi to Winnipeg, Canada, cubed. That's how big New Jerusalem is. 1,389 miles tall. If you took that cube and put it in the moon, the edges of the cube would stick out. That's how big. And that's how big it was when John measured it in 70 or 96 AD. How big is it now? It seems to be growing over time. This is another drawing from the ESV Study Bible. If you haven't got the ESV Study Bible, a fantastic resource. This is my drawing. I wish I had this to do over again. I would put it where the Holy of Holies is in the middle of the second section. You can see that there's ratios involved, 75 feet, 7.5 feet, 15 feet. It's all proportional. We get to something like this, and God says, make sure there are 5 columns on the front, but there are only 4 columns in the Holy of Holies. Does that strike you as odd? I mean, there needs to be 20 panels across, there needs to be 8. The columns are weird because you know how it gives you the measurements of how big it all is and how far to put the columns. Did you read that? It's kind of tedious when you read through it. If you actually put it down on a piece of paper and take time to count the columns, you know how many columns there are? The whole thing? There's 69 columns. Oh, and God dwells in a column of fire. So how many columns all total are there in the tabernacle? 70. And where's that number come into Scripture? Oh, wow, this is somehow connected. Like, these aren't just meaningless details, they're actually connected somehow to the story. So the bronze altar, lots of people have rebuilt this, tried to present what the tabernacle is like. in my opinion, this is the closest representation. And I want to ask you something, and you tell me what strikes you. So this is 4.5 feet wide, 4.5 feet tall, 7.5 feet deep, and 7.5 feet wide. What strikes me about that isn't proportional. It isn't proportional like the other thing, like this easy symmetry. We're told that you put horns on the edges, okay? And you put blood on the horns. So imagine you walked in here and there's blood all over the ground. God says, make sure this fire never goes out. It can't ever go out. And you saw blood on the horn. What would it look like had happened? I mean, you're just walking up to it. There's blood all over the ground. There are horns with blood on it. What would it look like had happened? It would look like someone had been gored to death, right? Like some people think that that altar was on a ramp. When it describes the priest, it talks about them going up on the ramp. If that's true, it's even higher than 4.5 feet. That would be the only thing that you saw when you walked in. If it's higher, if it's on any kind of raised elevation, you couldn't see what was behind it. All you could see is that. We don't know what it looks like, but we're told that there was a grate that went halfway. This is the one that they built in the Judean desert, and notice they put the ramp this way. This is so the blood can be carried away. I think this is the ESV Study Bible. They put the halfway the other way. Notice over time these altars get bigger and bigger. This is the bronze altar built by Solomon. You see that one's huge. This is the 4.5 feet tall one, 7.5 feet wide. We're told that the fire never can go out. No matter what happens, rain, snow, sleet, ice, don't let that fire ever go out. Is there anything else in the Bible that's described that way?
God himself.
Let's keep reading. The next thing described is the bronze laver. And this version of the bronze laver is the one built by the Temple Institute. If the Jewish people ever rebuild the temple, they already have the furniture rebuilt, and this is the one they're going to use. To me, it looks very similar to what's on top of the Temple Mount now. When they used to let you go up there to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they had a thing like this where you could wash your feet. They won't let non-Muslims go up there anymore because there's been so much trouble. But we don't know. We don't know anything about this thing. There are no dimensions. All we know is it had water. It was made out of bronze. They washed their hands and feet. Priests did. When Solomon built his, we're told that it held 22,000 gallons of water. In a math major, when the Bible offices were in the Anderson Annex, if you've ever been in that first office on the left, that's my old office, math major told me that if you filled that office with water, that would be about 22,000 gallons of water. So if you can think of that office, when Solomon built his, it was huge. on the backs of 7 oxen. I say it's like the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This looks exactly like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, so I don't know why those pictures are like that, but this is the artist's rendering. Table of showbread. Table is made out of what kind of wood? Do you remember when you read through? And what's true of acacia? Acacia is thorn wood. In fact, some acacias are poisonous. If you prick your finger, you'll get gangrene. They're the ugliest tree you've seen that only grows in the desert, and they're crooked. And I wouldn't even call it a tree. It looks like kind of a cursed tree or something. It got thorns all over it, and yet everything in the temple is built out of it except the top of this table. The top of this table is pure gold, and God says, put a crown around the top of it. So that seems odd. We're told that there's bread on top of the table, 12 loaves for Israel. They're wine containers to make libation offerings. This thing, we're told, is the menorah, 75 pounds of pure gold. And did you pick up when you read that there are a certain number of almond blossoms on there? Did you find that strange? Like 3, 3, 3, but up the middle 4? Did you take time to count how many of those are? 3 and 3, 3 and 3, 3 and 3. That's 18, and then 4 would be 22. Do anything for you spiritually, 22, that number? If we were Jews, we would get that, but we'll come back to it. This is the Temple Institute. You can actually see this in Jerusalem. 75 pounds of pure gold. They're doing their almond blossoms stacked. 1, 2, 3. And then I guess it's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the altar of incense. We're told that you put frankincense on that altar. Frankincense is a pure white substance. When you burn it, it smells very wonderful. Just like the outer tabernacle, the outer altar, you put horns on this one and there's blood on the horns. This is the Temple Institute altar of incense. And then at the center, you have the ark, which we saw the first use of the word ark is coffin. And then you have cherubs. And you can see on this, these are pictured as little girls. I'm not sure if I were picking kind of bodyguards for the Tree of Life, if I would pick 2 small girls. Nothing against girls, but just that's not the image that would come to mind. This is more an Egyptian looking. You see things like this in Egypt. This is Ezekiel's version. It's creatures that have the bottom half of animals, and they have 4 different heads, and they have wings and hands, and they don't ever turn. They simply move in the direction of whatever the face is. However you picture cherubs, what we know is that those cherubs are on the are on the veil. And one of the things you would do when you priest made an offering, he would come sprinkle blood on that veil. And you wonder over time, if you just put blood, if eventually that veil would be totally obliterated by blood and you couldn't see the cherubs. I don't know. I don't know if they washed it, but that's what we're told. everything made out of acacia wood, but you don't see acacia wood anywhere because it's all covered with pure gold. So when you walked in, this is what you would see, gold everywhere. My favorite description of the Ark of the Covenant is this one, and you can see this artist has merged Ezekiel's picture with Moses' description. If you read the Moses account, it says the cherubs are facing each other. You read Solomon's account, it says the cherubs are facing out. And you think, that is that a contradiction? You know, it's like, did they move? Ezekiel says they had 4 faces. And you realize, oh, they are facing each other and they are facing out. And this artist is trying to get to that. And this is my favorite drawing. I don't know about you. The 2 little girls don't, particularly strike terror. But I think if I came in the presence of this, it's like, I don't belong here. I need to get out now. And there are 2 of them, and they're to guard. And then we're told on the Day of Atonement that as the culminating act, the high priest is to go in, and on the top of the Ark of the Covenant, the priest will place blood. And you can see in this drawing there's just a few drops of blood. I want to ask you to imagine this picture, but instead of a few drops of blood, imagine there were lots of blood there. If you were looking at that, what would it look like had happened? All right, help me. Is that as much as we can get? Blood on the top of coffin, massive blood. Somebody's killed, but they're cherubs. Help me.
It looked like someone had been sacrificed.
Look like somebody sacrificed, maybe put in the coffin.
Or like somebody who went in there who wasn't supposed to be there.
It would look like somebody had tried to get back to where? Eden. And what had the cherubs done? Killed them. So, Chloe, do you mind if I ask you a question? So God says over and over in the Old Testament, I'll meet you between the cherubs. Is that good news or bad news to you? Or does it feel like good news or bad news to you? God says, I'll meet you right between the cherubs. Right. If I'm a sinner and I come between the cherubs, what are those cherubs going to do? Have you ever had like friends who are like really into macho stuff? Imagine like the most like in your face person you can imagine. Imagine that's your cherub, and they've been given one order: kill any sinner that comes within here. And God's saying, I'll meet you between those 2 people. It's like, I'm not sure that's good news. Do you know that the 4 living creatures in Revelation are cherubs? And the church is standing there. What should be happening? The cherubs should be hacking all the sinners to death. Is that what they're doing? Why aren't they doing it? Let's keep reading. It would look like on the Day of Atonement someone had tried to re-enter Eden and was slaughtered. This is a picture of the model that's in Eureka Springs, I believe. And you get an idea just how small the ark is there. This is a picture of New Jerusalem as a cube, 1,389 miles. You get an idea of just how big that city would be. I mean, so 60 chapters. Help me. What does it mean? That's what's there. What does it mean?
While I was reading it, I was wondering how the people would have responded to this, like to all of these instructions. Because personally, while I was reading through it, it was tedious, and I wanted it to be over. And I couldn't imagine the people who had to go and do all of that work, and like wondering what happened if somebody cut corners. May God have mercy on their soul.
We're told what happens. God kills them. Nadab and Abihu go in. They may have been drinking. The chapter before or after says don't ever drink when you're doing this stuff. So maybe they went in kind of half-cocked. But they didn't follow it exactly, and God killed them. And God not only killed them, he said to Aaron, do not shed one tear over these boys' death until you have fulfilled your term of being a priest. That seems stark, doesn't it? David?
How are you supposed to not drink if you're supposed to have basically communion inside of the tent?
That's a good question.
Bread.
That's a good question. I don't know.
It just seems like there's a lot of like impossible standards here. Like it's like God's trying to really be in your presence, but you can't ever fully be in his presence. You know? You're not supposed to murder things, but then you're constantly murdering things.
What do you have to be at peace with God? Perfect. Let me ask you this. If God forgave every sin that you've ever committed to today, and he took you today and he put you down in heaven, and he said, okay, here it is. As long as you don't sin, you can stay in heaven. But if you're an adulterer, you're going to get kicked out. If you're a liar, you're going to get kicked out. If you're a murderer, you're going to get kicked out. If you practice magic, you're going to get kicked out. If you're a coward, you're going to get kicked out. If God picked you up and put you in restored Eden and gave you those terms, would that be good news to you or bad news?
I'd say good news because we're incapable of sin. While in heaven, we're incapable of sin. I think we lose the knowledge of good and evil again.
Ethan, I think you're on to something. There are 4 places in the Bible that require perfect obedience. The first one's the Garden of Eden. How many times can you sin and you get kicked out? 1. Second place that requires perfect obedience is the Mosaic Law. Ask the guy who picks up sticks on the Sabbath how many times you can break that law. I mean, he does it one time, he gets killed. Ask Achan how many times you can hide the band in your tent. It's like the Mosaic Law requires perfect obedience. The third place that requires perfect obedience is the person of Jesus. Did Jesus ever sin once in thought, word, or deed? Okay, if we said the story of the Bible is a story of how you get the woman back to the Garden of Eden, do you realize that heaven requires perfect obedience? So, what has changed between original Eden and restored Eden? What one fundamental thing has changed? God has created a woman who's untemptable by evil.
And I have to disagree because I think we do have the knowledge of good and evil. It's the whole point of being covered constantly.
And we do have freedom. It's not like God makes it where we can't sin. God makes it where we won't sin.
I think that's part of the point of being tested on earth and being forced to choose God or choose evil.
Yeah, I might say that a little differently, but I think I'm agreeing with the point that what goes on here is related to what goes on there. But if God just put us into heaven and just left us who we are, that's not good news for me, because I'm a sinner. And these Old Testament sacrifices were for accidental sins. I don't know about you, it's not the accidental sins that plague my conscience. What plagues my conscience is when I'm just too sorry to do what's right, where I know exactly what God wants me to do, I know what God's will is, and I just decide I'm not going to do it today. I'm just going to do what I want to do. That's what's got to be fixed. That's why the new covenant is God takes away your heart of stone, gives you a heart of flesh. God cleanses you from all your filthinesses and from all your idols. God will cause you to walk in his ways. Then you'll loathe yourselves for your... But you got a new heart. You want to do what God wants done. You look to Jesus and you become like him. Now, I know I've used this analogy before. I can't think of a better one. There are some sins that just don't tempt me very much. There are other sins that do tempt me plenty. But there's some that I just don't find tempting. And for me, one of those is gambling. Like, I just don't get gambling. This summer, I took a trip to Las Vegas to do the Grand Canyon thing, and I was staying in cheap hotels, doing it on my phone and driving out there. And, the cheapest place you can ever stay is a casino. They'll almost give you a free suite, for like $29. It'd be a nice hotel room you've ever, because they know if you get the room in their casino, what's going to happen? You're going to gamble all your money away. And so you're going to pay $29 for the room, and you're going to lose thousands of dollars. Well, little did they know, I could walk in that casino with $10,000 of quarters in my pocket. They're not going to get one. Because it just doesn't make sense to me. There's just no appeal to do that. Can you imagine that? Take the thing that trips you up the most in life. That thing that you just struggle with and I just can't believe. Imagine that you're untemptable. Like you look at that and you think, why in the world? And do you realize that's what God's doing for the new Eve? That if the serpent were allowed to come and say, just break God's law. And the new Eve looks at the serpent and says, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. God has been so fundamentally good to me. Why in the world would I want to break God's law? What if the tabernacle is God's pointing us to the meta-narrative to get us to where we think about the true tabernacle of heaven? And we'll talk about that some more next week. Hope you have a great weekend.